Harmony Gulch wasn't much to look at. A single, dusty street stretched between the parched hills, lined with buildings that squinted in the relentless sun. The saloon, the Golden Nugget, boasted the only painted sign, though the gold lettering was peeling like sunburned skin. Next to it stood the general store, its wooden porch sagging under the weight of stacked crates and hopeful dreams. Across the street, the sheriff's office was a modest affair, more often occupied by napping dogs than desperados. Everyone knew everyone in Harmony Gulch. Secrets didn't stay secret for long, and gossip traveled faster than the stagecoach. The townsfolk were a mix of weathered miners, hopeful homesteaders, and shopkeepers clinging to the promise of a brighter future. They shared a common bond, a stubborn resilience against the harsh landscape, and a deep-seated suspicion of outsiders. The dust devils danced in the street, mirroring the swirling rumors that always seemed to be brewing. Children played tag between the water troughs, their laughter echoing against the false front buildings. Old men sat on benches, whittling wood and watching the world go by with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. The air hung heavy with the scent of sagebrush and wood smoke, a constant reminder of the wildness that still surrounded them. Beyond the town limits, the desert stretched endlessly, a vast and unforgiving landscape that held both promise and peril. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in a hazy blue, silent witnesses to the dramas that unfolded below. Harmony Gulch was a place where fortunes were made and lost, where dreams were born and died, and where the line between right and wrong often blurred in the harsh light of the setting sun. It was a town like many others in the West, a place where life was cheap and justice was often swift and brutal. It was a place where a wedding could turn into a tragedy in the blink of an eye, and where a young woman could become a legend with a single shot. It was a place waiting for Sarah and Emily to arrive and stir up the dust. Sarah and Emily arrived in Harmony Gulch with little more than the clothes on their backs and a shared dream of a new beginning. They weren't from around these parts, hailing from a quiet farming community back east, where life moved at a slower pace and the harsh realities of the West were nothing more than stories in dime novels. Sarah, the elder sister, possessed a gentle beauty with kind eyes and a soft smile that could melt even the coldest heart. She yearned for stability and a loving home, a stark contrast to the nomadic existence they'd led since their parents' passing. Emily, on the other hand, was a firecracker. Younger, more impetuous, she possessed a fierce loyalty to her sister and a spirit that refused to be broken. Her eyes, the color of stormy skies, held a wisdom beyond her years, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her small stature. While Sarah dreamed of settling down, Emily craved adventure and a chance to prove herself in this unforgiving land. They came to Harmony Gulch seeking opportunity, drawn by whispers of land and prosperity. But what they found was a town clinging to survival, its inhabitants hardened by years of struggle. It wasn't long before Sarah caught the eye of Jebediah Jeb Stone, a prominent landowner with a reputation as big as his ego. Jeb was a man of imposing stature, with a gruff voice and a swagger that intimidated most. He saw in Sarah a chance to legitimize his wealth and bring a touch of refinement to his rough-and-tumble life. Despite Emily's reservations, Sarah was drawn to Jeb's apparent strength and the security he offered. She ignored the whispers about his temper and the rumors of his past indiscretions, blinded by the promise of a comfortable life. And so, a whirlwind courtship ensued, culminating in a wedding announcement that sent ripples of excitement and unease through Harmony Gulch. The townsfolk wondered if Sarah truly knew what she was getting into, and Emily worried that her sister was making a terrible mistake. But Sarah was determined to make a life for herself in Harmony Gulch, even if it meant ignoring the warning signs that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The wedding day dawned bright and unforgiving, mirroring the unease that simmered beneath the surface of Harmony Gulch. A makeshift altar had been erected in the town square, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, a splash of color against the drab backdrop of weathered buildings. The townsfolk, dressed in their Sunday best, gathered to witness the union of Sarah and Jeb. Sarah, radiant in a simple white dress, tried to ignore the knot of apprehension in her stomach. She focused on Jeb, standing tall and imposing at the altar, and told herself that she was doing the right thing. She imagined a future filled with comfort and security, a haven from the hardships she had known for so long. Emily, standing beside her sister as the maid of honor, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She watched Jeb closely, noticing the way his eyes glinted with a strange intensity, the way his jaw clenched with barely suppressed tension. She saw him sneak a swig from a flask hidden in his coat, and her heart sank. The ceremony began, the preacher's voice booming across the square. As Sarah and Jeb exchanged vows, Emily's gaze drifted across the crowd. She saw a mixture of curiosity and concern in the faces of the townsfolk, a silent acknowledgement of the risks Sarah was taking. Following the vows, the reception commenced at the Golden Nugget Saloon. Tables were laden with food and drink, and the air filled with music and laughter, a temporary distraction from the underlying tension. Jeb, however, seemed to be indulging a little too freely in the whiskey. His laughter grew louder, his movements became more erratic, and his eyes took on a dangerous glint. Emily watched him carefully, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol she had concealed beneath her skirt, a gift from her father, a reminder to always protect herself and her sister. The festivities were just beginning, but Emily knew, with a chilling certainty, that the day was far from over. Something was about to break. The breaking point came swiftly and brutally. The music was still playing, a lively tune on the piano that now seemed grotesquely out of place. Jeb, fueled by whiskey and a simmering rage, grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip like a vice. She flinched, a flicker of fear crossing her face. He pulled her close, his breath hot and sour against her ear. "Smile, woman," he slurred, his voice laced with menace. "You're my wife now. You belong to me." Sarah tried to pull away, but Jeb's grip tightened. "Jeb, you're hurting me," she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. "Hurt? You haven't seen hurt yet." And then, in front of the entire town, he struck her. A backhand across the face, delivered with shocking force. Sarah stumbled, her cheek already swelling, a red mark blooming against her pale skin. The music stopped abruptly. The laughter died in throats. A collective gasp swept through the saloon. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Emily watched in horror as her sister crumpled to the floor, clutching her face. Jeb stood over her, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with anger. The townsfolk were frozen, paralyzed by shock and fear. No one dared to intervene. Jeb Stone was not a man to be trifled with. But Emily was not paralyzed. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins, obliterating her fear. She saw only her sister, hurt and humiliated, and a burning rage ignited within her. She had seen this before, the simmering anger that turned into violence, the possessiveness that choked the life out of everything it touched. She had promised herself she would never let it happen again. This time, she would not stand by and watch. This time, she would act. The pistol felt heavy and cold in her hand, a promise of retribution. The world narrowed to a single point, Jeb Stone and the need to protect her sister. Emily's mind raced. A whirlwind of memories, fears, and justifications battled within her. She remembered her father, a gentle man, teaching her how to shoot, not for sport, but for survival. A woman needs to protect herself in this world. Emily, he had said, his voice grave. Never hesitate to defend what's right. She thought of her mother, who had suffered in silence at the hands of a cruel man, a man not unlike Jeb Stone. She remembered the hushed whispers, the averted glances, the unspoken fear that had permeated their home. She had vowed then that she would never be like her mother, that she would never allow anyone to inflict such pain on her or her loved ones. But could she really shoot a man? Take a life? The thought was terrifying. She had never even pointed a gun at another person, let alone considered pulling the trigger. But what choice did she have? Jeb wasn't going to stop. He was emboldened by the alcohol, by the power he held over Sarah, by the fear he instilled in the town. If she didn't act, who would? Her hand trembled as she raised the pistol, her knuckles white against the cold steel. She focused on Jeb, his face contorted with rage, his eyes devoid of remorse. He was a danger, a threat to Sarah, a cancer on Harmony Gulch. The internal debate raged on, a cacophony of doubt and determination. Was she doing the right thing? Would she be condemned as a murderer, or would she be hailed as a hero? She glanced at Sarah, still huddled on the floor, sobbing softly. Her sister's pain was a physical blow, a sharp reminder of the stakes. The decision was made. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. She was not a murderer. She was a protector. She was a sister. And she would do whatever it took to keep Sarah safe, even if it meant taking a life. The pistol steadied in her hand. The world fell silent. It was now or never. The saloon was silent, every eye fixed on Emily. Jeb, oblivious to the danger, continued to berate Sarah, his words slurred and hateful. "Get up, you worthless." He never finished the sentence. With a speed that surprised even herself, Emily raised the pistol and fired. The shot echoed through the saloon, shattering the silence and sending a cloud of gun smoke into the air. Jeb stumbled backward, his eyes widening in disbelief. A crimson stain bloomed on his chest, spreading rapidly across his pristine white shirt. He looked down at the wound, then back at Emily, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. "You," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Then his knees buckled, and he crashed to the floor, landing with a heavy thud that shook the saloon. The pistol slipped from Emily's grasp, clattering onto the wooden floor. She stood frozen, her body trembling, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling her nostrils. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Sarah's sobs and the faint crackling of the fire in the hearth. The townsfolk remained motionless, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then chaos erupted. Some screamed, others gasped, and a few rushed forward to tend to Jeb. The spell was broken. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on everyone in the saloon. Emily had shot Jeb Stone, in cold blood, in front of the entire town. She looked at her sister, who was staring at her with a mixture of fear and gratitude in her eyes. Sarah reached out a trembling hand, and Emily took it, clinging to her sister's touch as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. They were in this together, now more than ever. The world had changed in an instant, and they were about to face the consequences. The sheriff would be here soon, and then everything would change again. The immediate aftermath was a blur of shouting, weeping, and frantic attempts to aid Jeb. But it was clear to everyone that he was beyond help. The life had drained from his eyes, leaving them vacant and lifeless. Jeb Stone, the most powerful man in Harmony Gulch, was dead. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Clem with a face as weathered as the landscape, arrived soon after, pushing his way through the throng of bewildered townsfolk. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, taking in the bloodstains on the floor, the stricken faces of the witnesses, and the trembling figure of Emily, still clutching her sister's hand. "What in tarnation happened here?" he demanded, his voice rough but weary. The story unfolded in fragments, pieced together from the accounts of various witnesses. Some painted Emily as a cold-blooded killer, others as a righteous avenger. But everyone agreed on one thing. Jeb had struck Sarah, and Emily had shot him in response. Clem approached Emily, his gaze unwavering. "Did you shoot Jeb Stone?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir, I did." "Why?" She looked at her sister, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance. "He hurt her," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He was going to hurt her again. I couldn't let that happen." Clem sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He had seen his share of violence in Harmony Gulch, but this was different. This was a woman standing up to a bully, protecting her sister from harm. He couldn't condone murder, but he understood the motivation. "I'm going to have to take you in, Miss Emily," he said, his voice laced with regret. "I have to follow the law." Emily didn't resist as Clem placed handcuffs on her wrists. She knew that she had to face the consequences of her actions. But as she was led away, she held her head high, her eyes filled with a quiet dignity. She had done what she believed was right, and she was prepared to stand trial for it. The fate of Emily, and perhaps the fate of Harmony Gulch, now rested in the hands of Sheriff Clem and the townsfolk who would serve as her jury. The question was, would they see her as a criminal or a savior? Harmony Gulch was a town divided. News of the shooting spread like wildfire, igniting a fierce debate among the townsfolk. Some, loyal to Jeb and his legacy, demanded swift and severe justice for Emily. They saw her as a murderer, a threat to the established order, and a disgrace to the town. They spoke of frontier justice, of the need to protect their own, and of the dangers of letting a woman take the law into her own hands. Others, however, saw Emily as a hero. They had long suffered under Jeb's rule, his bullying tactics, and his disregard for the law. They had witnessed his cruelty firsthand, and they had secretly cheered when Emily stood up to him. They saw her as a symbol of hope, a sign that even in the Wild West, there was room for justice and compassion. The women of Harmony Gulch were particularly vocal in their support of Emily. They had endured years of hardship and oppression, often at the hands of men like Jeb. They saw in Emily a reflection of their own struggles, their own hopes, and their own dreams of a better future. They organized meetings, collected signatures, and spoke out publicly in Emily's defense. Even Sarah, despite her grief and confusion, stood by her sister. She knew that Emily had acted out of love and protection, and she couldn't bring herself to condemn her. She visited Emily in jail every day, offering her comfort and support, and vowing to do everything she could to help her. The tension in Harmony Gulch was palpable. Arguments erupted in the streets, friendships were strained, and the town seemed to be on the verge of tearing itself apart. Sheriff Clem, caught in the middle of the conflict, struggled to maintain order and ensure that justice was served. He knew that the upcoming trial would be a defining moment for Harmony Gulch, a test of its values and its commitment to fairness. The eyes of the entire territory were upon them, waiting to see what kind of town Harmony Gulch truly was. Was it a town ruled by fear and vengeance? Or was it a town capable of compassion and understanding? The answer, it seemed, rested on the shoulders of a young woman who had dared to stand up to a bully. Sheriff Clem, a man worn down by years of trying to keep the peace in a town that often seemed determined to tear itself apart, found himself facing the biggest challenge of his career. He knew that the trial of Emily would be more than just a legal proceeding. It would be a referendum on the soul of Harmony Gulch. He spent his days investigating the shooting, interviewing witnesses, and trying to piece together the events of that fateful day. He listened to the stories of Jeb's victims, the people he had bullied, cheated, and abused. He heard whispers of his violent temper, his controlling nature, and his disregard for the law. He also listened to the voices of those who supported Jeb, the landowners, the businessmen, and the ranchers who had benefited from his power and influence. They spoke of his generosity, his loyalty, and his contributions to the town. They dismissed the rumors of his cruelty as mere gossip, exaggerations fueled by jealousy and resentment. Clem knew that both sides had a point. Jeb was a complex man, capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. He had built Harmony Gulch into what it was, but he had also ruled it with an iron fist. And now, his fate rested in the hands of a jury of his peers, a group of men and women who were just as divided as the rest of the town. He approached the trial with a heavy heart, knowing that whatever the outcome, it would leave deep scars on Harmony Gulch. He vowed to be fair, to uphold the law, and to ensure that Emily received a just trial. But he also knew that justice was a slippery thing, especially in the Wild West, where the line between right and wrong often blurred. The weight of the town rested on his shoulders, and he prayed that he would be strong enough to bear it. He would need to be more than just a sheriff. He would need to be a judge, a mediator, and a shepherd, guiding his flock through this dark and turbulent time. The trial began under a sweltering sun, the heat mirroring the simmering tension in the town. The makeshift courtroom, usually used for town meetings, was packed to capacity, every seat filled, every eye fixed on Emily as she was led in, her head held high despite the circumstances. The prosecution, led by a slick lawyer from a neighboring town, painted Emily as a cold-blooded killer, a woman who had taken the law into her own hands and robbed Harmony Gulch of its most prominent citizen. They presented witnesses who testified to Jeb's generosity and contributions to the town, downplaying his darker side and portraying him as a victim of Emily's unprovoked violence. But the defense, a young, idealistic lawyer who had recently arrived in Harmony Gulch, argued that Emily had acted in self-defense, protecting her sister from a man who had a history of violence and abuse. He called witnesses who testified to Jeb's cruelty, his bullying tactics, and his disregard for the law. As the trial progressed, flashbacks of Jeb's past misdeeds surfaced, casting a shadow over his legacy. Women came forward to share stories of his abuse, his intimidation, and his controlling behavior. Men testified to his shady business dealings, his exploitation of workers, and his willingness to use violence to get his way. Sarah, despite her grief and trauma, took the stand and testified bravely about Jeb's abuse on their wedding day. She recounted the fear she had felt, the humiliation she had endured, and the gratitude she felt for her sister's intervention. Her testimony was powerful and moving, bringing tears to the eyes of many in the courtroom. Emily herself took the stand, her voice clear and steady as she explained her actions. She spoke of her love for her sister, her fear of Jeb, and her conviction that she had done what was necessary to protect Sarah from harm. She didn't deny that she had shot Jeb, but she insisted that she had acted out of self-defense, not malice. The fate of Emily and the soul of Harmony Gulch hung in the balance, waiting for the jury to decide. During her closing argument, Emily's lawyer spoke passionately about the true meaning of justice. He reminded the jury that the law was not just about punishing wrongdoers, but also about protecting the innocent and upholding the principles of fairness and compassion. He argued that Emily had acted out of love and self-preservation, not out of malice or greed. He pleaded with them to see her not as a criminal, but as a victim of circumstance, a young woman who had been forced to make a difficult choice in a desperate situation. Emily herself rose to address the jury one last time. She spoke from the heart, her voice filled with emotion. "I didn't come to Harmony Gulch looking for trouble," she said. "I came here with my sister, hoping to build a new life for ourselves. But what I found was a town ruled by fear, a town where bullies like Jeb Stone were allowed to get away with anything they wanted." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the jurors. "I know that some of you think I did wrong. I know that some of you will never forgive me for taking Jeb's life. But I want you to understand that I did what I had to do. I couldn't stand by and watch him hurt my sister. I couldn't let him get away with it. I had to stand up to him, even if it meant risking my own life." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not asking you to condone what I did. I'm just asking you to understand why I did it. I'm asking you to see me as a human being, a woman who was forced to make a terrible choice in order to protect the one person she loved most in the world." She looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. "My sister is the most important thing in my life. I would do anything for her, and I know that she would do the same for me." With that, she sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. The fate of Emily and the future of Harmony Gulch now rested in the hands of the jury. They would retire to deliberate, to weigh the evidence, to consider the arguments, and to decide whether Emily was guilty or innocent. The town held its breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine its destiny. The jury deliberated for what seemed like an eternity. The sun beat down mercilessly on the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. The townsfolk waited outside, their faces etched with anxiety, their conversations hushed and subdued. Sheriff Clem paced nervously, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the closed door of the jury room. Inside, the jurors argued, debated, and wrestled with their consciences. Some were convinced that Emily was guilty, that she had taken a life and deserved to be punished. Others were swayed by her testimony and the evidence of Jeb's cruelty, believing that she had acted in self-defense. The foreman, a grizzled old rancher named Jedediah, struggled to maintain order and guide the discussion. He knew that the decision they were about to make would have far-reaching consequences for Harmony Gulch. He wanted to be fair, to be just, and to do what was right, but he also knew that there was no easy answer. As the hours passed, the tension in the courtroom mounted. Sarah sat beside Emily, her hand clasped tightly in her sister's. They exchanged glances, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They knew that their future and the future of Harmony Gulch depended on the decision that the jury was about to make. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury reached a verdict. The foreman knocked on the door, and Sheriff Clem rushed to open it. The jurors filed out, their faces somber and unreadable. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood before the judge and announced the verdict. Every breath was held, every heart beat a little faster. The fate of Emily and the soul of Harmony Gulch was about to be revealed. The words that followed would echo through the town for generations to come. We, the jury, find the defendant, Emily, not guilty. The words hung in the air, a thunderclap that shattered the tension and unleashed a torrent of emotions. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by a roar of cheers and applause. Some wept with relief, others embraced in celebration, and a few, loyal to Jeb, muttered their disapproval and stormed out of the courtroom. Emily, stunned by the verdict, looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with disbelief and gratitude. Sarah squeezed her hand tightly, her face radiant with joy. They had done it. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. The courtroom erupted in chaos as the townsfolk surged forward, eager to congratulate Emily and Sarah. Sheriff Clem, despite his weariness, managed a smile. He had upheld the law, and the jury had spoken. Harmony Gulch had chosen compassion over vengeance. Outside, the celebration continued, spilling into the streets. The women of Harmony Gulch hoisted Emily onto their shoulders, parading her through the town like a conquering hero. The men fired their guns into the air. The celebration lasted late into the night, but as the dust settled and the whiskey ran dry, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Harmony Gulch had chosen compassion, but the scars of the trial remained. The divisions within the town were still present, and the memory of Jeb Stone, whether revered or reviled, would continue to cast a long shadow. Emily and Sarah, exhausted but relieved, found themselves at a crossroads. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. They knew that they could never truly belong in Harmony Gulch, not after what had happened. The eyes of the townsfolk would always be upon them, scrutinizing their every move, judging their every action. They decided to leave, to seek a new beginning in a place where they could escape the shadow of Jeb Stone and the memory of that fateful day. They packed their meager belongings, said goodbye to the few friends they had made, and prepared to embark on a new adventure. Sheriff Clem, watching them ride out of town, felt a pang of sadness. He had grown to respect Emily and Sarah, to admire their courage and their resilience. He knew that they were good people, and he wished them well. He also knew that Harmony Gulch would never be the same without them. They had brought a spark of hope to a town that had long been shrouded in darkness, and their departure would leave a void that would be difficult to fill. He tipped his hat as they disappeared over the horizon, knowing that he would never forget them. The legend of Emily, the young woman who had stood up to a bully and changed the fate of Harmony Gulch, would live on forever. Years passed. Harmony Gulch slowly began to heal, the memory of Jeb Stone fading into the background, replaced by a new sense of hope and unity. The town learned a valuable lesson about compassion, forgiveness, and the importance of standing up to bullies. New businesses opened, new families arrived, and Harmony Gulch began to thrive once again. But the legend of Emily, the young woman who had dared to challenge the status quo, continued to be told and retold, passed down from generation to generation. She became a symbol of courage, a reminder that even the smallest person can make a big difference. As for Emily and Sarah, they found peace and happiness in a quiet farming community far from Harmony Gulch. Sarah eventually remarried, finding a loving husband who cherished her and treated her with respect. Emily remained single, dedicating her life to helping others, using her skills and her courage to make the world a better place. They never forgot Harmony Gulch or the events that had transpired there. They often spoke of the townsfolk, wondering what had become of them, hoping that they had learned from the past and built a better future. They carried the scars of that fateful day, but they also carried the knowledge that they had done what was right, that they had stood up for what they believed in, and that they had made a difference. Their lives had been forever changed, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live their lives with purpose and compassion. The ripple effects of Emily's actions continued to spread, touching the lives of countless others and proving that even a single act of courage can have a profound impact on the world. But even as the years passed and the legend of Emily grew, a question lingered in the minds of those who remembered the events of that fateful day. Was justice truly served? Some argued that it was not. They pointed to the fact that Jeb Stone was dead, that a life had been taken, and that Emily had escaped punishment for her crime. They insisted that the law should have been upheld, that Emily should have been held accountable for her actions, regardless of the circumstances. Others argued that justice had indeed been served, but in a different way. They pointed to the fact that Jeb Stone had been a bully, a tyrant, and a danger to the community. They argued that his death had brought peace and justice to Harmony Gulch, that Emily had acted as an instrument of fate, delivering a punishment that he richly deserved. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in between. There was no easy answer, no simple solution. The events of that day were complex and multifaceted, and the question of justice remained a matter of perspective, a matter of individual interpretation. What was certain, however, was that Emily's actions had changed Harmony Gulch forever. She had challenged the status quo, she had stood up to a bully, and she had inspired others to do the same. She had shown the world that even in the Wild West, there was room for compassion, for forgiveness, and for the triumph of good over evil. And so, the legend of Emily continued to grow, transforming her into a folk hero, a symbol of hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, one person can make a difference. The story of Emily, the young woman who had shot her sister's abuser, became a timeless tale, a testament to the power of courage, the strength of sisterhood, and the enduring quest for justice in a world that often seemed to lack it. The wind whispered her name through the canyons, carrying her story to every corner of the West, a reminder that even in the most unforgiving landscapes, hope can still bloom.